Booth's Milo. Please forgive us in advance, as the photos in this video are not put in order of any sorts. When Booth dogs first hit the States, they hit like an atomic bomb. People can hate it all they want, but this is the truth. Much of this is because of the people who owned them and the people who ended up with them. The American pioneers of this blood, if you will, would be T. Riviata and Dead Game Kennels. Prior to Booth sending dogs to the States, for the most part you only had not all dogs here in the States. Yes, there were a couple of non-consequential other lines that had made it to the States at this time, but none of them had the impact on American dogs like Nuttall and Booth did. You had spin-offs of the Nuttall line such as the Clute line, but again I would say that line has had the impact that Booth dogs have had. Not to mention many dogs that were sent here from across the pond were dogs that had quit or been culled from another man's yard. If you know anything, you know this was and still is a common thing when men import dogs. I guess this can be expected when buying dogs from literally the other side of the world. Prior to the information age, there were only a couple online sources for the dogs, and they were Dead Game Kennels, J&J Kennels, Gone Digging, more so a source of information or pictures, and forums like Barn Burner Kennels. Many men abandoned their Nuttall dogs and started obtaining Booth dogs. We've heard stories about men abandoning the Nuttall dogs because they were barkers and other non-work related things, going as far as to cull entire yards. Mind you, we are speaking about terriers here. While the Patterdale Terrier is supposed to be more quiet than most terriers, it is still a terrier and barking comes with the territory to some degree. Booth dogs had a reputation for being very hard dogs. If I'm not mistaken, when the Booth dogs first hit the States, Booth was living in Ireland. At the time they had a reputation of putting some great terriers in the ground in Ireland. Also, Booth dogs were coming in colors Americans had not seen commonly here in the States. Red-nosed dogs. Yes, there were other dogs in the States these colors, but if you trace most of the dogs that you see today of this color, you will see that they go back to the Milo dog. But we all know what happens to majority of lines if you start focusing on the color of the dogs too much. Interestingly enough, this is one of the things we can recall Booth speaking about when we met him in person, and that was the fact that he did not agree with breeding two dogs that express recessive color traits. An interesting concept that we can see the prudence in. This being the case, many of the breedings that were done here in the States would have never happened on Booth's yard simply because Booth doesn't believe in breeding two red dogs. One of the first Booth dogs to make a big impact on American dogs is Booth's Milo. In fact, one could argue that Milo made the biggest impact on American terriers out of all of the Booth dogs to come to the States. Some of this was because Milo was considered to be a good hunter, and the other reason being the person that owned Milo was Fulford. And Fulford was willing to let people get pups off of Milo to start their own lines. Milo was imported from Ireland at the age of 4 years old from Booth by Todd Fulford. Story has it that Booth gifted Milo to Fulford and even paid the shipping expense to have Milo shipped to the States. Here in the States, Milo had a brother by the name of Red Rocket, who was another Booth blood dog that made an impact on the breeding here in the States. Again, because of who owned him, and many Americans found this particular dog to be a very good-looking dog. In many ways, Red Rocket looked like a good old red-nosed pit bull terrier. However, Red Rocket was born in Ohio and was bred by Riviata. Red Rocket was born in a litter of 3, and according to Fulford, he had the largest head he's ever seen on a Patterdale Terrier. Red Rocket's biggest issue was that he was too big to do earth work in the States. Nonetheless, he was bred and other lines were started down from him. Lines such as the Grave Digger line of dogs came from Red Rocket being bred back to a daughter of Booth's Milo. It is difficult to find working quality dogs from the Grave Digger line these days. There may be some hard dogs out there from the line, but we are not aware of any being used to do the job in its entirety. During Milo's career in the States, so long as Fulford had Milo and could produce pups, he was willing to share with those who valued the pup enough to convince Fulford to part with them. So the blood ended up in several different hands. If you know anything about dogs, you know it is best to bet with the man and not the dog. This being said, each of these individuals that got their hands on this blood produced different qualities of dogs. One of the results of the breeding of some of these men are producing dogs that do not locate or even attempt to locate. We've seen this with our own eyes with multiple dogs that came from this blood. This is a trait you have to be careful of if you have an interest in this blood. For you can't remove what you cannot find when it comes to quarry that you are hunting. A dog that can't locate is worthless. Milo was said to be a great locator and a real deal terrier when it came to his job. But the dogs can only do so much. This is one of the reasons, aside of the fact that we are not in the dogs for money, we have not sent our A.C. dogs all over the states, even though we could have easily made a killing on selling them, as they are the most highly sought line of terriers in the states at the time of this writing. However, we know enough to know, and history has proven time and time again, if you send a popular line of dogs to many different men's hands and are not very selective on where you send them, you run a higher chance of the dog line becoming watered down and only a shadow or shell of the dogs that started the line in terms of working. Many men start breeding programs with big ambitions only to fall short. Some of this is due to lack of resources, personal problems, education, and/or men found out that hunting the dogs took some work and opted to just breed them rather than hunting them. Back then, the kennels that had the initial Booth imports were Dead Game and Riviata. Riviata being an individual, not a kennel. Both of whom worked their dogs at the time. I don't think there was ever any argument about this. J&J Kennels, who was not known to work their dogs as much as the previous mentioned names. It's always been maintained by Craig, who is the son of the man that started J&J Kennels, that while he himself did not hunt the dogs, he was more of a kennel boy, if you will. He always said his other family members hunted the dogs. But we will save J&J for another story. Eventually, kennels like Weapon X, which is another kennel that didn't work their dogs much, MQH Kennels another that didn't work their dogs, and Buckeye Kennels also had the blood. Buckeye Kennels is still around and doing a little hunting these days. From what we believe we understand at the time of this writing, Buckeye got their dogs from Dead Game Kennels at some point in time. It has been said that while Milo was a pretty hard dog in the ground, he was not as hard above ground. He was considered to be a true earth dog to the men that owned him. In fact, he was so ideal to Mr. Fulford that he has been quoted saying that his goal is to produce another Milo. Which likely would have happened by now if his yard wasn't hit back in the early 2000s by LE, which put him behind in many ways. It's a shame that more of the men that bought pups from him didn't work their dogs and keep the blood in good shape to help Fulford out when this happened. For Fulford was nicer than us, as I don't believe we would have allowed individuals to purchase pups to start their own lines if we owned Milo. Milo was out of Booth's Simon, a well-known worker and producer which is said to have some border terrier in him. Simon was a very impressive worker, and when we say worker, we are talking about earthwork by all accounts we've heard. However, he was almost called at one point in time by Riviata for baying at a quarry above ground, only for Riviata to learn that Simon was a true earth dog that did his job in the ground like an ace. We've seen other terriers like this. They will be much softer of quarry above ground only to be the best thing going in the ground. We have mixed feeling about this. From one side of the coin, it's better for a terrier to be focused on ground work than to be soft in the ground and only hardening up once there is light on their back. But from another perspective, this is not a trait that we prefer to see by any means. There are still some straws from Simon around from my understanding. Simon was off of Fogarty's Sam, which is a dog that not much is written about. If you happen to know of a good source for this information, please feel free to leave it in a comment below. And Simon was out of Booth Tonic, which is a Hall of Fame dog. Tonic was a great producer and a great worker of badger and fox. She made an impact on the breed here in the States as well as in the UK. A feat not many terriers can claim. One that comes to mind that can claim this is our dog champion, Clint Hall of Fame. It is generally accepted that Tonic is off of Ellis's Rock and out of Booth's Great Gin Dog. While the Rock Dog was off of Wheeler/Thelon's Foxy and out of Wheeler's Dilly, we do not know what Gin is off of. Milo was out of Booth's Tiny, who was off of Booth's Tippery Tim, and Booth's Tonic, whose pedigree we just explained. This makes Booth's Milo double bred on the Great Tonic Hall of Fame bitch. Oftentimes when you see a reddish red-nosed short-haired dog in the States, it is coming down from this blood. The way they have been bred in the States, another trait you will often see is prick ears in this blood. It is not as easy to find working quality of the blood nowadays. And when we say this, we mean dogs that can do the job from start to finish in the ground. Again, one issue that is seen in this blood here in the States is they don't locate as well as needed. You also don't see them the proper size for earth work here in the States. As with any line of dogs that is extremely popular, you get individuals that keep them simply for the name and do not work them or cull the blood as is needed to keep it in its top working shape. We have a little male called Red out of this blood that is down from the Dead Game's Olds dogs from this family. Red was one of the dogs that was purchased by one of our kennel partners during our search for good digging dogs. Red was one of the very few that made our cut. We use him occasionally for breeding. These days Dead Game has a grandson of Milo in their kennel still, and they have access to some straws related to this blood. One of the main studs that they use to this day is a dog named Bill that is pretty much a pure old Booth bred dog. Bill is related to Milo though, aunts and uncles. However, they also have some older Nuttall blood that they use as readily as any. Always interesting to see how other put their dogs together. Our dog Red is a good worker that has been grafted many times. I wouldn't consider him a world beater, but he is a solid little dog that can be dug to in many situations. We are not aware of any serious hunters having success with the J&J dogs that are bred down from this line. Not saying there are none that exist. But the terrier community is very small, and we would have more than likely known about them if they existed. Part of this could be due to the breeding practices behind the J&J dogs and being they were not worked as much as some of the others. And part of it is due to the politics behind the dogs. People hated on J&J kennels quite a bit. So when kennels like Total Performance Canine Kennel has dogs off of a dog that was registered as J&J Finn MC Cool, who was born as Murdoch Jesse, they opted to not go with the J&J name on the dog due to politics, as well as the correct name for the dog is Murdoch's. Again, if you know of any working examples from this kennel from this blood, feel free to comment with the sources in the comments. Good dogs are where you find them, and it's interesting to track how they are developing. That being said, there are some men in the tri-state area that are still running old Booth dogs that are pretty active in working them. They are good men that have dug plenty in the past and are continuing to work on digging to their dogs. I imagine their dogs will be as close to the real deal as one can find. Another man that we have always been fond of and had respect for as his seems to be a winner in life, a man with morals and character where many terrier men lack, is Muddy Paws, who owns a double granddaughter off of Milo that has the out of Mason Sissy, which is another dog that we will touch base on in the future. At some point in time we will likely breed Edwards/Booth's CH Clint Hall of Fame dog to some of their bitches that go back to this blood. While Buckeye Kennels is still doing some hunting, we are not aware of any serious hunters outside of their ranks, if you will, that is using the blood for hunting. That doesn't mean they don't exist, but again, the community is a small one. Nonetheless, they are a source that you could potentially get workers that come down from the Milo dog. This is what Booth wanted to have crossed with his Edwards Clint Hall of Fame dog, which is the dog that Booth used as his main stud to click with his older blood. We are proud to own a dog like Clint. And we will likely cross the blood again sometime in the future. This is in the hopes that the lack of hunt drive that Americans have produced in these dogs is corrected. It's unfortunate to see how this line has gone here, and he states being men don't dig their dogs as often here in the States. We owned one of the last daughters of the Milo dog for some time, but gifted her to a friend in California as we had quite a team of working bitches and she wouldn't get utilized on our yard to her full potential. We paid a decent amount for her, but happily gifted her for free to another solid man. There are some men that have the old Booth blood on the other side of the pond, and it is interesting to see how different they look from the blood that is here in the States. They have totally different look on the other side of the pond. I'm sure they also have different drives, as the men on the other side of the pond are actually using the dogs for their jobs, while it is hard to find Americans that are doing the same with any consistency. At the end of the day, you can't speak on the story of this breed in America without speaking about Booth and or his great Milo dog. Well, we hope this have been both informational and enjoyable. I'm sure there are mistakes here and there in this video, as this information has been passed down over time. Any mistakes made are honest ones. Either way, until next time, don't settle for less than the best terrier you can get your hands on and expect them to complete their job from start to finish alone without a gang of kennel mates. Always remember, a digging dog is a terrier superior. And above all, remember it's 3XO.